I am here with Tom Lee here at ChainXChange Conference. Tom, thank you for coming
Tony?
on the channel. I watched you present. You watched me present right after. So what do you think of the space right now, and what kind of audience do you think we're speaking to here?
Well, the space has been tough, right? Cryptocurrencies are down really substantially the last few months, and of course, it's hurting sentiment, both on projects and investors and people owning these things. And I think we're sort of seeing that at this conference. That there's a lot of pain, and I think we're in a bear market. But I think, look, it's a bear market in price, but I think the fundamentals have actually been fairly positive in crypto. So in some ways, I don't know if I would rather be a bear here. I think it's actually time to be looking more on the other side of that.
Yeah, interesting that you said that. I wasn't gonna get the price right away, but you know what? Let's start off with price. A lot of people always ask me about price as well. So you do see that we are in this bear market, and when do you think it will end, or do you think it's about to end any minute?
Well, one of the things that I'm realizing is crypto has price dynamics that are very different than traditional markets, which is my background. And there's a much greater degree of reflexivity at work, meaning lower prices are bringing out a lot more sellers. And I think price transparency just isn't as good as it is in other markets because there's a lot of spoofed volume or OTC order books that aren't real. But to us, I think the bottom that should be taking place is, one is the fundamental news needs to be improving, and I think that is taking place. I think the ICE back news is positive. One thing that our data science team looks at is the cost of Bitcoin mining, and Bitcoin fully loaded cost today is over 7,000.
Is that what your team came up with?
Yes.
Because I've recently seen an article that mentioned that someone is mining up in Canada for just over 2,000 Canadian dollars per Bitcoin, and that's their cost. It was mentioned in one of the articles about Bitcoin mining out of Canada.
Yeah, it's possible that this is an incremental miner that, one, if you look at capital charge, if they got an S9 at a really reduced price, but electricity cost is also substantial because you need, I think our guys are running it at 6 cents per kilowatt hour, and so someone can be buying electricity much cheaper. But if you look at the overall, mining community, the fully loaded cost is probably closer to what our guy is modeling.
Okay, and but just because even if the mining cost is $6,000 to $7,000, why does Bitcoin have to stay above that level? Why can't it fall down to a significantly lower level, and we get this big purging out of the mining space because the Bitcoin hash rate will adjust lower if miners come off the network? Sure, it'll be a little bit less secure, but it could be a good thing for the market and get rid of some of these inefficient miners and maybe decentralize the space a little bit, because I will continue to mine with my single ASIC, Canon ASIC actually, which is right behind this wall, right behind us. They have a booth here. And I think it's almost a good thing that lots of more people will be mining because they want to, not for a profit.
Yeah, it's a great point. I understand the argument. Someone will say, look, you can't compare mining costs the way you can look at other commodities, because in gold, there's this true lift up cost, extraction, replacement. That's why gold is governed by this sort of price to book ratio historically. But what's been hard to fight is our team has modeled historical price to break even mining ratios of Bitcoin and forward returns, and it's very explanatory. Bitcoin has a difficult time advancing when its price to break even mining is 2 standard deviations above trend. And Bitcoin has almost always had positive forward returns when it's trading below break even mining. So mining cost in the proxy that we've developed actually still seems to explain forward Bitcoin returns.
All right, let's change gears a little bit. We'll talk about our price predictions later. Let's change gears a little bit to those fundamentals of Bitcoin. What do you see as Bitcoin's fundamentals that are important to the price of Bitcoin?
Well, it's I think the most important metric for any new technology is really the adoption rate, and so for Bitcoin and for other crypto assets, it's really the number of active wallets. It's really explained, for instance, when you look back at the internet, and I mentioned in our presentation that if you just simply model the price of the FANG, which is Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, not on their business model, but just based on the number of internet users at that time, that increase in users explains 75% of the return of FANG stocks since 1997. And I think that when we look back a decade from now and look at the move in Bitcoin, I think it's going to be mostly explained by how many wallets exist.
Interesting, but how do you see that, right? Do you treat a user that, let's say, uses a Trezor and is storing all of the Bitcoin themselves versus a user that is trusting a Bitcoin bank like Coinbase? Do you treat them equally?
Yeah, it's a good point. And in your presentation, you also brought up something interesting, which is, look, if a wallet is established for commerce, right, it's just simply Bitcoin moving in and out. That's different than a wallet that's taking it off chain and storing it. 100%, there's a big difference between a Coinbase wallet that could have 1 million Bitcoin versus an individual that has one. But when you think about the network effect, both are actually quite important, because today, if there's 50 million Bitcoin wallets, there's 388 million Twitter users, there's 4.5 billion internet users. I think that crypto really needs that network effect, which means you need to really grow the number of wallets sharply.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's just that I think it's going to be very difficult to get that actual number. With internet, it's easy. How many people are paying for internet access? It's almost easy to measure. In Bitcoin, there are so many wallets that just contain dust. It's free to create but it's free to write a script and create 1 million wallets tomorrow. So I really hope statistics on that. And this is what bothered me when I was listening to the Senate hearings. And once again, some senator is out there reading statistics to the panelists saying, does it bother you that 50% of all Bitcoin is held in 0.04% of all wallets, not factoring in the fact that some of those wallets are exchanges holding Bitcoin for thousands of people. And the overall number of wallets, some of them contain dust that they shouldn't even count.
Yeah.
And these statistics bother me greatly, and I hope someone can give us a real statistic of how many actual Bitcoin users are there.
Yeah, that's right. It would be great if it was self-reported active wallets, or that wallets could be pinged, so you could see if there's activity or if they're connected online. But maybe the metric that we're going to look for in the future is really merchant wallets, right? I mean, that's something that will probably be reported, and if you see a huge growth in merchant wallets, we know that.
I mean, to me, it's going to be the biggest factor is not going to be necessarily merchant wallets. It's going to be merchant questionnaires on what they're doing with the Bitcoin that they're accepting as merchants. And the more merchants start to actually hold on to that Bitcoin for bonus purposes, try to get their employees to accept it, try to get their suppliers to accept it. As I see those numbers rising, that's when I'm going to start being optimistic about Bitcoin, because so many merchants came online in 2014 and they're now gone.
Yep. That's right, Tone. And as you know, Wavecrest was actually one of these sort of interesting gateways to crypto, to traditional, because of the ability to use a prepaid debit card, Visa or MasterCard. But in some ways, when you're talking about supply and demand volume, that's kind of why it's interesting to think about future investment products as well, because those can absorb supply, almost take things permanently off chain. An ETF, I think, is another example of how you could actually almost take supply completely offline.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with that. And let's transition into the ETF. Now, I was early last year in 2017 when we were hearing rumors about the ETF back in March of 2017. I gave it a 5% chance of approval. And this whole year, I've been very skeptical about the SEC approving the ETF. And I'm not even sure if they should approve the ETF. I can argue both sides. What are your general thoughts? And do you think it's coming? And when do you think it's coming?
It's a great question. I think one of the things that does need a little clarification is that there's US ETFs and then there'll be non-US ETFs. And I think the probability of a non-US ETF is actually quite high.
We already have out of the Scandinavia region, there is an ETN, there's one for Ethereum, there's one for Bitcoin.
Yep, CoinShares.
And I don't pay for that data feed through my Interactive Brokers exchange, but it's there. Maybe I can probably even trade it if I ask for permission from my international broker to trade it. But ETNs are a little bit different. Same thing with ETPs like GBTC. An ETF, like a GLD ETF, does take that coin and put it in storage to back the ETF. And the way I see it, the SEC has two problems. One of them is right now they're trying to wrangle with whether Bitcoin is important enough to have an ETF, and do they have a handle on the underlying price discovery of Bitcoin, which they feel that they don't. And the separate problem is who's responsible for the cold storage of that Bitcoin, because that's dangerous as hell. A lot more dangerous than holding onto the gold of GBTC.
Yeah, but but just to be clear, I think there will be ETFs outside the U.S. So not just because the CoinShares is a great start, and in fact, we found that they're actually a leading indicator in some ways. That when CoinShares is 75% in our guess institutionally traded, so it really reflects what big money is doing.
What kind of volume? I mean, I haven't looked at it closely. What kind of volume are we looking at over there for like average weekly or average daily volume? Would you know off the top of your head?
So the thing is, it's an SEK, but it's about $1 billion of AUM, so it's not small.
Okay, so it's about a billion in what currency? In their currency?
No,
billion
USD.
Of Bitcoin.
Billion USD.
About $1 billion USD in what time period?
No, that's just the AUM is about $1 billion.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it. But are they actually holding Bitcoin in cold storage? I don't think
yes.
so.
Well,
I thought it was just paper settle like the futures.
No, so CoinShares has no NAV breakage. So they buy and sell based on the daily inflows and outflows actually into the CoinShares product. So it's as close to a traditional ETF product as you get. So it's very different than Grayscale, which has an NAV, trades at an NAV that's very different than the underlying held.
Okay, got it. Okay, so what do you think about the US ETF specifically? What do you think the SEC is thinking?
Well, I think financial regulators it's very difficult to predict their outcomes, so in other words, I think it's, I did telecoms for 17 years, and it was always difficult for me to try to understand what decisions the FCC would make, and I think the SEC is just as hard to understand. So I think the probability is quite low, and you can see the disappointment in the market when it wasn't approved. In fact, I think in some ways, many investors think the ICE-backed announcement was actually more important, but it was sort of overshadowed by what happened with the ETF.
Okay, so do you think it's coming this year or no? I'm gonna say no.
I think it's possible, but I think the probabilities it's just difficult to understand.
Okay, and do you think if an ETF does come, do you think it'll be a big positive for the price of Bitcoin?
100%, it's positive. In traditional markets, ETFs are fairly small percentages, maybe 5 or 10% of the aggregate market, and they're very low cost. I think in the crypto world, it may be the preferred way for many traditional accounts to want to hold Bitcoin.
So in that case, if you see the launch of the ETF being very positive for Bitcoin, how do you explain, I think it's borderline coincidence that the market topped the day of the futures launch. What was in hindsight, I can answer the question fully because that's exactly how I explained the prior ETF. The reason, in my view, I felt that last year, Bitcoin should have gone above 7,500. 7,500 was supposed to be my top for the year, but then it had this FOMO, and the futures launch helped this FOMO. So to me, it was all speculative FOMO, and when the futures launched, it was a sell the news event.
Yeah.
So I can picture the same thing even with the Bitcoin ETF. If you know it's coming, there's going to be this FOMO, and then when the event happens, the volume is going to be not that great, and people are going to be like, "Oh, that's it," and it'll be probably a sell-off. We have the same exact thing over the halving. I called it last time as well. Everyone buys in preparation for the halving. By the time the halving comes, nobody left to buy. The only thing left to do is to sell.
That's a great question. Although, what price do you think Bitcoin would be if into the ETF approval?
Honestly, it also depends if we're in a bull or a bear market.
Yeah.
Like what I always say, we're in a bear market right now. I do not expect this bear market to end any earlier than November and probably into next year. So we're a little different on that. And in my view, news never changes a bear market to a bull market. News never changes the bull market to a bear market. It needs to just exhaust itself. So this is why when the ICE news came out, the backed exchange news came out, just like the ETF news and all the other good news over the last 5 months, I just kept saying it doesn't matter. You're in a bear market. It's gonna eventually reverse when you see some notable rage quits, when you see some notable maybe lawsuits, when Novigrad just announced that they're down like 85 million. I'm sure you saw the headline. I'm waiting for like Tim Draper to rage quit and sell like 200,000 Bitcoin. I'm waiting for something big. Maybe Tether or Bitfinex will implode because we've been waiting for that for a while now. Like something big is coming, and that will eventually like make people hate Bitcoin. And that's what I'm waiting for to call the end of the bear market. I don't think it's going to be that easy.
I think that's all very fair and good perspective. It's hard to say because unlike the futures launch, right? Because the futures launch one, as you said, there was a lot of FOMO into that announcement. This ICE-backed announcement is physically delivered Bitcoin, so it's different than a cash settled product. And if they launch in November, it may end up just changing the supply demand dynamics around Bitcoin.
All right, let's. I don't want to keep you too long. What's your view on altcoins in general, and then maybe we can do some specifics, like ICOs, altcoins, Bitcoin. How do you separate the three?
Yeah. To us, they're clearly different because of the stage and the level of risk investors take.
Who are the investors in your statement?
Well, investors for altcoins and ICOs, they really have a pretty broad spectrum, right? It's family offices, it's individuals, it's Asian investors, it's some people recycling their profits from previous Bitcoin and ETH holdings. We generally view altcoins as a sort of a correlated asset class to itself. And we published this measure called the percentage of altcoins that have tripled. And this number historically peaks at around 75-80%, which happened in January of this year. And at that time, we actually said the altcoin cycle has peaked 1 week after that. And if you look at past altcoin cycles, we're kind of in a period of purgatory. So I think altcoins are, it's going to be very difficult for altcoins to rally without a Bitcoin recovery. Or in the midst of a bear market for Bitcoin, I don't know if it's possible for altcoins to rally.
So as people are selling these altcoins right now because they're crashing a lot faster, where do you think they're moving to? I mean, everyone is selling them. Are they moving into Bitcoin? Are they moving into US dollars? Or how do you feel the situation right now?
I don't have a good feel because, I think there's a couple dynamics, right? There's the treasury balances of some of the projects that hold ETH, and I don't know if they're converting it to USD, which they may be. I think that the altcoins have fallen so much that even if they're rotating it into Bitcoin and ETH, it's at diminished values. But I think there's a regional issue. I mean, in Asia, we still sort of find many crypto investors think Bitcoin's kind of boring. They're a lot more interested in new projects, and they want to find the next sort of big Bitcoin faster and better.
Got it. So do you believe that there will be a use for altcoins in the future? Let's say in 10 years.
I think the burden is on these projects to sort of prove and solve problems. I think there are going to be some successful projects, but I think the easiest, surviving project in our minds is something that is solving an existing problem today. So to us, Bitcoin has proven itself, in 9 years.
Oh yeah, no, we agree on Bitcoin, of course. Is there anything you want to name that you see us promising into 3 to 5 years from now that so far? I mean, I'm not a big fan of Ethereum, but lots of people think it will survive another 5 years.
Well, I think our work tends to focus more on late stage established projects because we just tend to look at the equivalent of large cap. But I do think Ethereum and EOS in some ways is analogous to Yahoo, Google. And, I think that there's, like, as you mentioned, there's a good chance Ethereum, survives. We're doing some work right now looking at the value of the ERC20 relative to Ethereum. And there is some evidence that there is network value. So in other words, as there's been a growth in projects, it has actually supported a higher and justified a higher price in Ethereum. But by that same token, looking forward, it does mean for Ethereum to survive, there has to be some projects that were issued on ERC20 that turn out to be, millions and millions of users.
All right, well, I'm going to let you go on. Let's talk about the price of Bitcoin, our last little topic. I've been pretty much a bear all year, ever since around January 15th or so, January 15th, January 20th. Around that time, I was in Thailand. I did some videos with another trader, and we talked about the possibility of Bitcoin going as low as $2,000 in this bear market. My most optimistic price prediction is 5,000. My most optimistic time prediction is late October, early November. On the pessimistic side, I'm looking at 1,300 and stretching out all the way into August. Now, we can meet somewhere in between, but I can't see myself changing my mind on the bear market before we go under 5K. And I still think that going into year end, we will probably be not much, like either under 10,000 or not far above it. So I do believe that we will be down approximately 50% at year end than we were going into 2018. So that's my price forecast, even though I hate forecasting the end of year when I haven't called the end of the bear market yet. So that one is still a little iffy. What are your views? I know you've been wanting Bitcoin to go back to 25,000 or 20,000 by year end. Are you still thinking this, or what is your most recent look? Because, look, I always tell people, a person's prediction is really only as good as his last prediction. Like, it's crazy when people go back to something you said in like January, and after you've already said something different, like 5 months later, and they're still talking about what you said in January. I hate that. So here's your chance to give a brand new outlook that should cancel out the prior one if you want to.
So one, I hope we don't see these levels, but it's hard to look. The market's going to make its own decision. Remember, one of the things I've learned doing research is we can't tell the market what to do. But the reason we think Bitcoin can still recover is looking at Bitcoin's price to break-even mining and its break-even mining cost, but also the idea that 10 days account for most of the return for the year. So if you look at the top 10 days in any year, on average, those 5 days represent a 500% move. Bitcoin exactly a year ago was around 3,500, and it made its move to 20,000. So I agree, though. I think this year has been a lot more bearish in price action. And I think that there's been a very seismic shift in how some of these ICOs and altcoins, I think a realization that some of these are misallocated capital. But, you know, I'm still optimistic on Bitcoin, but you know, the technical picture is ugly.
Yes, and I'm more of a technical analyst. Like I wanna look. I believe in Bitcoin. I still have most of my Bitcoin. I didn't sell. I'm holding through it. Right. It's giving me motivation to continue hustling, continue working. But the fact that my workshops are now 75% cheaper than they were back in December, because I charge in flat in Bitcoin, zero point 0.1 Bitcoin, no matter what the price of Bitcoin is. We'll see what happens if it falls to my pessimistic targets. I won't be able to do them anymore. But I agree with you. But my view is that another problem that I have with the fundamentals is that back in the 2014 bear market, as bad as it was, there was only one Bitcoin. Everyone knew what one Bitcoin was. And altcoins were very, very small fraction of things. Today, you meet an average person, and he's not even a Bitcoiner. He's selling you some altcoins. So I don't even see the same fundamental unity that we had back in 2014.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. There's been dilution, right? Because there's Bitcoin, there's Ethereum, there's a lot of other large cap projects, and there's a lot of investments in to be issued tokens. But when I look at where supply and demand recovery would take place, it's really going to be where there's established infrastructure, and I think it's going to take place in Bitcoin.
All right, so give us a price, anything, a week, a month, end of year, your best thoughts. I don't hold, I'm a trader. I don't hold other traders to their price. I know the Twitter trolls do. Give us your best thinking on the price. You know mine.
Well, I think it's a lot easier to have confidence on longer term views, and at least for us. So I still think the best analog to think about is Bitcoin is going to benefit from growth of wallets. And maybe the easiest way to think about this is that if we go from 50 million wallets to 500 million wallets, or active users, right, a better measure, the increase in price of Bitcoin is going to be well above the 10x increase in the number of wallets. And I think that's I think the most important way for someone to think about whether or not they want to, hold their Bitcoin, sell it, even if they're if we're in a bear market and you're correct and we're down for another year, right? Because I think you're talking about August 2019. I think it still makes sense to not to sell your crypto and to walk away, because I think it's going to be, that's selling Amazon at $38.
All right. Well, I tried, guys. I tried getting a number. I guess Mr. Tom Lee is saving it for CNBC. That's where we can find you, correct?
You can you can find us on Twitter, or you can find us through our research services as well.
All right. You wanna tell the people your Twitter handle and where they can actually find you, websites, and where they can catch you on TV?
Yep. So our Twitter handle is @Fundstrat, FUNDSTRAT. Our website is www.fundstrat.com, and you can find us in the media occasionally.
Awesome.
Tone, this was great.
Right. Thank you very much, and thank you for presenting here as well. And hey, had a great time, and maybe we'll do another one of these soon.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Cool. All right, you get your mic.